Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very special guest today is writer Pamela Olson. Pamela's new book is Fast Times in Palestine. Thank you for being here, Pamela.
Thanks for having me.
It's a tricky road map to follow. Eastern Oklahoma, Stanford University, Palestine. How did you get there?
Well, there's a long version of the story and a short version, so I'll kind of shorten it. But basically, you know, I went to the Oklahoma School of Science and Math, my last 2 years of school in Oklahoma City, and that was like a solid rocket booster that kind of, you know, allowed me to even think about applying to a place like Stanford. And I decided to study physics, in part because I was interested in alternative energy. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized kind of the reason, I mean, the bottleneck for alternative energy isn't physics research, it's actually politics. So I decided I wanted to understand this, you know, beast of politics, and because it, you know, even in as far as getting research grants from the government or from the defense departments or whatever, you know, politics plays a huge role. So I didn't want to be like at the mercy of that force. I wanted to understand it. And of course, that's a very deep rabbit hole. You know, for somebody, I was very politically naive coming from Eastern Oklahoma, and you know, you're like, Reagan did what in the 1980s in Central and South America? Nobody ever told me that. So, so by the time 9/11 happened, I was kind of primed with a healthy skepticism for what sort of the press and the government might tell me about certain things. And what they were saying about the Middle East just didn't ring true for me at all. They were essentially dehumanizing, you know, a billion people with this rhetoric of like axis of evil, and they hate freedom, and you know, this and that, and it set off alarm bells in my head. But like most Americans, I knew nothing at all about the Middle East, so I felt very helpless and frustrated, and I didn't know where to start. And so what ended up happening is I took a jiu-jitsu class after I graduated from college, and there was a cute guy in the class.
It always happens that way.
Yeah, you know, and he was Lebanese, it turns out, and we started dating. And, you know, I didn't even know enough to ask him any intelligent questions. So I just said, you know, how do you say thank you in Arabic? And he said, shukran. I said, shukran. He said, no problemo. But that kind of like was the little spark that ignited, okay, now I want to learn more about Arabic and more about, and the way he talked about Lebanon, you know, he said the beaches are beautiful and the women are gorgeous and it's the best food in the world and there's mountains and there's this and there's that, and it sounded like Club Med, right? And then on the news, it sounds like some nasty desert full of bearded maniacs who want to kill you for your freedom. So long story short, about a year after I graduated, a friend in France invited me to travel with him in Egypt for 3 weeks. And I thought, you know what, there's no better way to just get your feet wet than just go there and check it out. And you know, and I was afraid at first that because I'm American and the Iraq War was going on by now, people would be like suspicious or angry or like, you know, not like me or whatever. But immediately people put me very at ease. You know, they seemed actually very happy to see somebody from America, you know, coming unarmed and, you know, open and just trying to look and see what's going on. So I felt very welcome and very comfortable. And 3 weeks later, when my friend left, I continued on alone to Jordan, and I had a wonderful time. There's these ruins and there's beautiful deserts, and there's just, I don't know, it's hard to describe. The book tells about it, but I had such a wonderful time. But then I got to Amman, Jordan, which is the capital of the country, and you know, the second Intifada was going on, the Iraq War was going on, and Amman is where everybody flies in on their way to Palestine and on their way to Iraq. So all of a sudden I was surrounded by stories, by everyone from these places telling, you know, gathering and saying, you know, this is what's happening in Baghdad, this is what's happening in Palestine. And it bore no relationship to what I was hearing back home on the news. So I wanted to find out, you know, are they lying? Are they exaggerating? Or are there things that I have not been told that I should know about? So I chose Palestine instead of Iraq because it was safer at the time, and that's how I got started.
When is the first time you can remember feeling beyond your comfort zone?
I mean, even just in the airport in Cairo, I was beyond my comfort zone because, you know, there's all these gorgeous women with the hijab and this perfect makeup and looking very serene, and I was kind of like, you know, my face was bare and I was wearing a tank top and just feeling totally out of place. And then all of a sudden, these two guys just bounced up to me and said, "What are you from?" And I said, "America." And I was like, "Oh crap, should I have said that? You know, maybe they're gonna, you know, whatever." But they said, "Oh, America, you know, welcome in Egypt." And then they, you know, and then they just bounced away. And I was like, "Oh, maybe it won't be so bad after all."
And some people actually thought you were from Japan.
Yeah. When I first got to Palestine, to this village called Jayus in the northern West Bank, a town about the size of my hometown in Stigler, they asked me where I was from. And then I was kind of out of my comfort zone again, because it's one thing to be a tourist, it's another thing to be in an actual conflict zone. So instead of saying America, I said Oklahoma. And they said, "Oh, you are Japanese." And I said, "No, not Yokohama, Oklahoma." And then they were like, "Oh, wow, Oklahoma City, it's a dangerous place." And I said, "What have you heard about Oklahoma?" I mean, I was thinking tornadoes or like cowboys and Indians, or like I couldn't imagine what they were talking about. And they said, "Wasn't there a bombing?" And I said, "Well, yeah, once, 10 years ago. It's not like, I mean, don't you have plenty of your own bombings to worry about? Like, you don't need to be worried about Oklahoma." But it was just kind of like a realization of how when you don't know anything about a place except its worst disasters, it gives you a very skewed impression of what those places are like.
You do a beautiful job in your book of detailing your own learning curve, and I was hoping you would read a couple of paragraphs for us.
Okay, sure. So this is the next day, my second day in this village of Jayus. We all came out to do the olive harvest, and to my shock, we pretty quickly encountered like a 20-foot high chain link fence with electronic sensors and army access roads and trenches and piles of razor wire bounding the whole thing that said, "Mortal danger, military zone. Anyone who passes or damages the fence endangers his life." These big red, scary signs. And I was like, what's going on? Are we going to Israel? And they said, "No, in this area, Israel built this wall and it separates us from 75% of the land that we own. And we have to apply for permits from Israel to get to our land." And it's at the time I couldn't make heads or tails of this. It didn't make sense, but by the end of the book, it all makes sense. But anyway, at this point, it was just very impressionistic. And this was when we were coming back. So getting to the land, we had to wait 2 hours for the soldiers to show up and allow us to pass, from about 8 in the morning till 10 in the morning. And then at the end, we had to wait like an hour and a half. And it got dark and the sun went down and everyone prayed, toward the setting sun because it was time to do the prayers. So it was nearly dark when the soldiers finally arrived. As the once merry villagers lined up somberly, making sure to behave, while the young Israeli soldiers questioned them, checked their documents, and waved them uncaringly through, my soldiers bowed and my head ducked. A horrified weight of sorrow settled on my heart. I felt like I couldn't bear to watch this awful scene, to quietly accept it, but there was nothing I could do. After a few moments, it dawned on me that I was wrong. I leveled my head. I straightened my shoulders. If nothing else, I could at least try to face this situation with as much honesty and dignity as I could muster. With that, I realized something else. I had always assumed, watching scenes like this on the news, that the people who bore such things must either not quite care about life as much as I did, or they must have some kind of supernatural coping mechanism that I couldn't begin to fathom. Because if anything like this happened to me, I assumed I would utterly fall apart. Now I felt ridiculous for ever imagining such a thing. Here I was, and unendurable things were happening right in front of me, to people who were no different from me at all. And they were bearing the situation with dignity, not because they didn't care or because they were saints. They simply had no other option except being miserable, which wouldn't help anything, or resisting. And this was a point in time when resistance was probably futile. Instead of feeling destroyed, to my surprise, I felt energized by a clarity of purpose I'd never felt before. Suddenly, the conflict in this part of the world was no longer a blank horror. It was merely an extremely difficult series of challenges whose basic units were human beings. Enough people of goodwill could surely find a way to resolve them, and maybe after I learned a great deal more, I could find a way to help.
It's beautifully, beautifully written. Which brings us to an irony. When you first arrived in Palestine, 2 journalists asked you if you were a journalist too, and you said no. But then we get a little deeper into your book, and there's a chapter called Suddenly a Journalist. Help us with the transition.
Yeah, so after I ended up living in Jayus for 5 weeks. I went there for 4 days. I was hooked. I didn't want to leave. I met so many great people, including a young man who, the first time he met me, he spoke to me in Russian, and I guess he assumed I was a Russian, And then I said, oh no, I'm American. And he said, why are you speaking Russian? And I said, why are you speaking Russian? You're Palestinian. But he had just come back from studying in Russia for a year and a half, and I'd studied it as an undergraduate. So we had like the secret language that we could speak that nobody else could understand. And we kind of, bonded over that. And just like so many people that I met, and I wanted to get to know them better, and I wanted to learn more about all these crazy impressionistic things I'm seeing but not understanding. So, but after 5 weeks, I still didn't want to leave, but I was out of money. I had a plane to catch. I went home. And for 6 months, I just socked money away so that I could go back and volunteer for about 6 months, and just crammed my head with all the knowledge I could about what's, like getting caught up on how did we get to this situation, how did things come to this pass. Meeting with dialogue groups and student groups and Israeli film festivals and a class on the history of Zionism and these different things. And in the spring, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who's a progressive Palestinian political leader, gave a talk on the Stanford campus. And I really liked what he had to say, but of course, a lot of political platforms sound great. The question is, can he deliver? Can he get support? And are there forces both internally and externally that make it difficult for moderate leaders to get power in the Middle East, especially in Palestine? So I decided to volunteer with him. And I came to Palestine, to the city of Ramallah, with nothing but his business card. I didn't know a single person. So I just wandered in, I called the number, and they were like, we don't have to pay you? Yeah, sure, come on in. So I volunteered with them for about 3 months, just editing documents and writing reports and different things like that. And to my surprise, after 3 months of that, I get a phone call. And one of my coworkers says, there's a vacancy at the Palestine Monitor, which is an English language news source in the same building. And she said, if you want the job, you can have it, the head writer and editor of the Palestine Monitor. And I said, are you sure you have the right number? I'm a physics major, ex-bartender from Oklahoma who's just kind of wandered in 3 months ago. Do you really think I'm qualified to run a news organization? And she said, don't worry, you'll figure it out. So I spent the next 3 months just, again, like cramming and trying to learn all the things I needed to learn, both to be a journalist and to be a journalist in Palestine, which is a huge subject. I feel like I got kind of an independent master's degree in Palestine studies over those 3 months, just incredibly, working incredibly hard to get caught up. And then I finally did. And then another monkey wrench got thrown at me. Yasser Arafat died. And that set a whole other chain of events into motion. The most salient to me was my boss at the Palestine Monitor, the same political leader, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. He announced he was going to run for president against Mahmoud Abbas. And he needed someone to be his foreign press coordinator, somebody to speak to the world's press on his behalf, or the foreign, mostly English language press, on his behalf about the campaign. So it was essentially another full-time job on top of the full-time job I already had, for no pay for the next 2 months until the campaign was over. And at the time, something really terrible had just happened. A friend of a friend had been shot in the back and taken to an Israeli hospital, and his parents couldn't visit him without, they couldn't go to the hospital in Israel without going to the hospital in Israel to get a paper that said he was in a hospital in Israel. So it was like a catch-22. So I went on their behalf to try to get the paper because I can travel freely with an American passport. And it was just, it was very harrowing as far as, watching this young man finally be able to contact his parents and tell them he's probably not going to walk again, and dealing with Israeli bureaucracy that was very hostile for about 5 hours. They kept sort of saying, we don't deal with these people, why are you trying to help these people, and just very disheartening and very exhausting. And it was right when I got back from that ordeal that he announced it and said he needed a foreign press coordinator. And I was like, oh God, because I was the only native English speaker who wasn't leaving for the holidays. So essentially he was asking me to do it. And I'm like, all right, fine, I can do it. But once the kind of exhaustion wore off, I was like, actually, this is pretty amazing to have a front row seat in this historic campaign.
Tell us about going to Arafat's funeral.
Yeah, it was a really interesting, it's kind of a theme in the book. There's a lot of times when I'll watch something happening, and then I'll open the New York Times or go turn on CNN at my house, and what I'm reading or what I'm seeing bears no resemblance to what's actually happening. And it was similar when Yasser Arafat died. You saw these guys, these CNN guys, desperately looking for some kind of riot or some kind of, clash or conflict or something they could cover. And when they didn't find one, they just make something up, or they would like show a picture of somebody burning their trash and say, oh, look, there's fires. And it's like, dude, they burn their trash every Thursday. It's not a big deal. But no, it was very subdued and it was very respectful. And, Palestinians have there's a whole spectrum of opinion about Yasser Arafat, from people who absolutely hate him to people who think he's, God incarnate. And those opinions have changed over time for various reasons that I talk about in the book. But at this day, it was like, look, he was our leader for a long time, for better or worse. Let's give him his due. So people from every political party, every stratum of society kind of gave him a respectful goodbye. And it felt like a very unified day that was about Palestine and not about parties or factions or this kind of thing. And I went to the Muqatta for, when they were actually the helicopters carrying his body were going to land there and they were going to bury him, and there was like almost 1 million people gathered in this space. And I kept trying to get closer to the action just because, that's what you do. And as the crowds got sort of more compacted, some teenage boys started making grabs from my backside. So all the while I was doing this, I was playing whack-a-mole, trying to get these guys, hands off my business. And then finally I turned around and punched a guy in the clavicle. And I don't even know if he was one of the guys who was doing it. I felt pretty bad, but anyway, they stopped doing it after that, and I could just sort of concentrate on what's going on. But certainly when the helicopters came into sight, and you could start hearing them, and they were coming over the horizon, everyone just went quiet. And it just felt like a moment of pure history. And everyone sort of absorbed it in his or her own way. My friend Muzna, she's this really, she grew up in Morocco. She's Palestinian, she grew up in Morocco. She speaks perfect French. She's very glamorous, and she had her like kufiya around her head and these Audrey Hepburn sunglasses, and she was just like the glamorous mourner. And then other people had their own ways of doing it or whatever. But, to be there in the middle of that for this moment, I felt like very privileged.
Oh, incredible story. I wondered, in your role as a foreign press secretary, did that give you any new insights into American politics?
It did. Mostly as far as the American press and how they, how and why they don't respond, they don't report very honestly about what's going on in this region. I'll give you an example. So Dr. Mustafa, the Israeli Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, told everyone, of course we want our neighbors to have democracy. We're going to allow the presidential candidates to move freely, and we're going to let everyone vote on, voting day. And the fact that he's telling you whether or not he's going to allow the candidates to move and the people to vote kind of tells you all you need to know about this authority. It doesn't really have that much authority. Israel actually has ultimate authority over almost everything. So, but I thought, well, at least, okay, fine. He's saying that, I hope that'll be the case. But in fact, checkpoints actually increased in the run-up to elections. And, Mahmoud Abbas, he had very free passage wherever he wanted to go. But Dr. Mustafa he was arrested twice. He was kept out of East Jerusalem. He was kept out of the old city of Hebron. He had a hard time getting to Gaza. And at one point, he was actually taken out of his car and beaten to the ground by Israeli soldiers on his way to a campaign stop and hospitalized. And so, they told us the story, and I wrote a press release. I sent it everywhere to all the contacts I'd made. And the next day I open up the New York Times, and I can't find it anywhere. I'm looking. Finally, there's another article about an 8-year-old girl who was killed by an Israeli soldier in Gaza, not related to Dr. Mustafa, but sort of hidden, buried in that article was, elsewhere, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti claims he was involved in a scuffle with Israeli soldiers. The soldiers denied the men had been hit. And that's kind of it. You can imagine if a presidential candidate anywhere is beaten by anyone, it should be pretty big news, right? But not in this case.
You saw a lot of harsh things in Palestine. Tell us about the happy times there.
Yeah, that's one of the things that when I came back from Palestine, I wanted to share what I learned, the good and the bad. And almost every book I read or I see, it just focuses on the bad. And that leaves out 90% of the story because, Palestine is not just the occupation. It's not just conflict. It's its own thing as well. And in the city, Ramallah, where I lived, they have amazing cafes. They have a gorgeous beer garden. Like, I think it's the prettiest beer garden I've ever seen. It's on a hillside, and there's trees, and there's bougainvillea, and a thatched roof bar where there's Carlsberg and all this, Red Bull and vodka, whatever you want. I spent a lot of time there. And Palestine actually has its own beer called Taibeh. And every October, this Christian village called Taibeh, which is, located pretty close to Ramallah, it has Oktoberfest, which is a huge party where, there's Palestinian hip-hop bands and a rock rap band called Culture Shock. And the lead singers are these two Jerusalemites who are like, they're a couple, and they're both gorgeous, and everyone has a crush on them. But, and then, people come from all over the world to this thing, and even from Israel, because I guess they say, if there's beer, it must be safe. So the Israelis join, and it's just this wonderful celebration and dancing and street food and arts and crafts, and all set in this historic village with these Byzantine ruins right in the middle of it. It's just I've never just been a part of anything like it. Sort of as much fun as that is, and it's a wonderful vision of what can be possible if things can ever calm down. This sort of communal beer drinking, happy-go-lucky kind of event with Israelis and Palestinians. But of course, the problem with the conflict is not that Israelis and Palestinians can't get along together. The problem is after the party's over, the Israelis go back to a place where they have full human rights, and the Palestinians go back to checkpoints and curfews and violence, and their land being stolen by these fences and their water being siphoned off for settlements. So that's the real problem.
What brought you back to this country?
A couple things. One was I couldn't get a work visa to live in Palestine because the Israeli government controls residency in Palestine, and they don't like journalists to come and sort of reveal what they're doing in some cases. So they gave me a hard time at the border always. And I also had Syrian and Lebanese stamps on my passport, which was a red flag. So, sometimes they'd hold me for 8 hours and interrogate me and go through all my things and go through my cell phone and read all my text messages, read my day planner, and then sort of interrogate me for hours. And it's very exhausting and draining and dehumanizing. And finally, they started giving me an even harder time. And I realized at some point they're probably going to kick me out. So I'd rather do it on my own time than let them do it while I'm in the middle of a million things, and my stuff's all in my house and everything else. And I haven't said goodbye to my friends. So I kind of deported myself, I guess you could say. But part of the reason was also because the impressions and the experiences and the emotions that I had gone through in that year and a half, it kind of builds up behind a dam in your psyche in a way. And you feel like somehow you need a break so you can deal with it, so you can kind of normalize yourself a little bit. And that's easy for me to say. I can leave whenever I want and go to a country where I have full human rights. For Palestinians, I seriously don't understand how they live, under this situation for decades, and they never have a break, and it's almost unbelievable. And the third reason I wanted to leave is because I got a little bit fed up writing articles that it was all just disconnected. It was all these people died, and this child died, and this happened, and that happened. And unless you already have an idea of the whole situation, this disconnected anecdote is not going to fit anywhere. It's not going to make any sense. It's not going to, So I wanted to put something together. Well, initially I went to Washington and tried to, change politics from the inside. It didn't work out so well. So I decided I wanted to take everything that I learned, all of this huge store of stories and, impressions and feelings and amazing people and fun times and everything else, and just put it in one place so that, on the one hand I could give it to my friends and family, and they would never have to wonder, what I'm talking about when I'm talking about Palestine. They'll have a view of the whole gamut of my experiences. And the other was so that people all over the U.S. who know about Palestine and have friends who don't can hand them this book and say, well, start here. This will show you the good and the bad, and the realities and a lot of the politics. And it's kind of I think what's unique about it is that I basically divide books into chocolate books and spinach books. And the chocolate books are the ones you read because you want to, and they fly off your shelves and you blaze through the pages, and you don't want to go to work and you don't want to go to sleep, and you keep reading because it's fun. And then the spinach books are the ones that, you're like, I should read it, I should know what's going on in it, but, they kind of sit in the back of your shelf and you never quite get to it because you keep buying more chocolate books. So this is an attempt to like hide the spinach inside the chocolate, if you know what I mean. Because there's like, romance and adventure, and my parents come for a visit, and that's hilarious, and, all kinds of things happen. But by the end of it, you kind of get a good meal, a good nutrition, I guess.
Did you learn anything about yourself by writing this book?
Yeah, I guess the biggest change that happened was when I wrote the first drafts of the book, a very close friend of mine said, "This doesn't sound like you. And if you're not going to write a book that sounds like you, you're wasting your time." So I completely rewrote it, and I wasn't trying to be like anything other than just like myself. And it sort of let the chips fall where they may. I wasn't trying to be a travel narrative or trying to be this, trying to be that. I was just like, this is the actual story, for better or worse. And I realized when I did that, because it feels very queasy at first, because you're like, if you're revealing your honest self and it gets rejected or criticized or whatever, then that's very difficult. But when it was published, the sky didn't fall, and like nobody treats me like that much differently, and you just realize being honest isn't that difficult at the end of the day, and it's actually it makes things much more relaxed, because you're not trying to hide behind anything or keep track of what you're supposed to be like. You're just like, nope, I'm just like myself. So that was helpful.
We just have 30 seconds left here. Can you imagine what your life would have been like if you hadn't gone to Palestine?
I really can't. It's almost impossible to imagine. It had such an effect on me, and the people I met, and I don't know, I changed so much. I mean, if you read the book, you can see how it changes me, and I can't imagine anything else.
Well, Pamela, thank you so much for being with us today, and thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.